For many people in the West, the name Somalia has come to be associated with the faces of the starving that are now so hauntingly familiar. This small piece of Africa has a fascinating past and a distinct culture. Sadly, so much of that has been obscured by the images of the famine and the relentless civil war. So what we do know about this country is that it is in the midst of much suffering. Our senior correspondent, Brian Stewart, is no stranger to Africa and its history. And tonight, to help us understand a little more about Somalia, he has prepared this background report.
How can history explain such apparent madness? In Somalia, warehouses full of food. Emergency food no one can move because of the roaming gangs of teenage gunmen. Then intervention from far away to save a country seemingly trying to kill itself.
It's now clear that military support is necessary to ensure the safe delivery of the food Somalis need to survive.
The irony, of course, is that outside powers, now so appalled, helped push Somalia into this dark chaos. Historically, it is critical to know that Somalia differs in one curious aspect from most of Africa. For centuries, it's been made up of one homogeneous people, not a collection of tribes. There should be a benefit, but there's a catch. To survive in a harsh land as pastoral nomads and farmers, Somalis have had to rely on the supporting bonds of clanship. It's always a loose confederation of clans struggling over scarce resources, a certain recipe for instability and conflict. But Rukia Omar, a prominent Somali and former head of the human rights group Africa Watch, says we are wrong to see clans as only negative.
You know, you have people who speak the same language, who have the same religion, who have more or less the same history, but there was a clan system which essentially was, you know, everyone's form of social security. It was, you know, the community where you belonged. It was there were clan elders with whom you identified and who had responsibility for the clan. And essentially, it was a form of address.
Unfortunately, clans are also an invitation to divide and rule politics. The British and Italian colonizers used this method to keep the country relatively stable, easy to do while clans are weakly armed. Still, with independence in 1960, Somalis had reason to rejoice and be proud. Theirs is a rich culture with so extraordinary a fascination with poetry, it's been called the nation of poets. But if poetry defines Somalia's soul, position has ruled its destiny. In the Horn of Northeast Africa, Somalia has been doomed to be one of the most strategic places on earth. In time of colonies and Cold War, a key garrison dominating the sea lanes to the Red Sea and Suez, and poised close to the oil fields of the Persian Gulf. For superpowers, an immense prize to be bought at any price. In 1969, Somalia's fragile democracy was overthrown by General Siyaad Barre, who soon declared a socialist state, backed by Soviet arms and expertise. But the Soviets also backed Ethiopia in a border war between these two traditional enemies in the late 1970s. This gave the U.S. an opening to outbid the Soviets in Somalia and replace them as supporters of the Siyaad Barre regime. In came more arms from outside. And now disaster, for the brutal Siyaad Barre soon turned the politics of divide and rule the clans into a bloodbath.
You had an extremely ruthless, cruel, and ambitious dictator who, above all else, wanted to turn what was widely regarded as Africa's most homogeneous country into a nation of enemies. He wanted every region to mistrust the other, and he wanted all clans to be beholden to him.
He sent his own southern Darod clan against the northern Isaks, killing tens of thousands by massacre, torture, and firing squad. One of the leading historians of Somalia, I.M. Lewis.
He was very knowledgeable about the clan divisions, and he exploited them. He armed those groups that he thought were friendly or supportive to him, and he encouraged them to fight his opponents. So there was quite a distribution of arms among the civilian population in the let's say, the 80s, as Siyaad struggled to retain power.
To the U.S., Barre may have been despicable, but he seemed needed. Frank Creedler, former U.S. ambassador to Somalia.
We supported him essentially at that time for strategic reasons, because it was valuable to have backup access to military facilities if they became needed.
But the end of the Cold War made it all meaningless. The U.S. finally cut off arms in 1990. Sensing weakness, warring clans united long enough to drive Barre from power in January 1991. U.S. advisors made their own getaway as the regime collapsed. In the wake was left a nation brutalized and destroyed. Clans in the north declared separation, their own Somaliland, while the south collapsed into civil war.
In a sense, they're just doing what Somalis did in the past, in the old traditional clan system, and fighting between clans. But what is so terrible is the effects of the use of modern weapons. I mean, it's okay with spears, but it's quite a different matter when these people have bazookas and anti-tank rifles and anti-tank guns and artillery.
Warring clans displaced hundreds of thousands from their homes and farms, and this swarm of refugees added to the growing chaos that inevitably led to famine. Rukia Omar says the Siyaad Barre terror left clans nothing to believe in except force and self-protection, for which she blames the superpowers.
You know, Somalis will ultimately have to take responsibility for the fact that Somalis also supported the Siyaad Barre regime and of course the last 2 years. But Somalis would have gotten rid of Siyaad Barre much earlier and at much less cost to their nation and their future if it wasn't for the fact that he got so much support, diplomatic, economic, and of course military from first the USSR and then much more importantly from the United States. So this superpower rivalry has a great responsibility for what's happening now.
Finally, it is hard to see how a policy of heavily arming a regime that owes its very existence to clan warfare could lead anywhere but to disaster. And that's what we have today. The U.S. is forced to try and fix a mess it helped create. It is hard to be optimistic, but then again the Somalis, though separated by clans, do have a sense of being one ethnic people. The way out of chaos will likely be to give the clans a sense of security, while at the same time appealing to a deep-seated sense of Somali nationhood. Sounds difficult, but then again, it hasn't been tried for a while. For Primetime News, I'm Brian Stewart.